Well, thanks, Marty. Thanks for the opportunity to guide this session. It's very timely with the work that we're doing, and I'm also excited to learn from our fellow panelists. So let's get into it. My name is Monique Malloy. I'm the Chief Corporate Affairs Officer of Gemma Biotherapeutics. As Marty said, based out of Philadelphia, our lab was in the University of Pennsylvania for over 30 years. It's the lab of Dr. Jim Wilson, who's a founder and leader in the field of AAV gene therapy. And after all of that time, we decided to take all of our work and leave the academy. And so now we're in this Gemma Biotherapeutics to take the assets that we've established through over 3 decades of preclinical work and making sure that they get to patients in the rare disease community. So in Gemma Bio, we focus on rare or orphan diseases and advanced therapies, specifically gene therapy. Rare diseases, if you're not familiar, affect less than 200,000 people in the United States and largely affect children, pediatric diseases, disabling, horrible, and many times lethal diseases. Children die before they're 5 years old. Many of these rare diseases are caused by a single genetic defect. And so with the advance of DNA sequencing, which is really come along in the past decade, we've been able to help diagnose patients with diseases and then also identify new diseases based on the genetic sequence. So these diseases are called rare or orphan because the pharmaceutical industry has decided that they do not have enough patients to commit funds for the research and development to develop the therapeutics. And so as our lab has worked on this, as I said, for over 3 decades, the idea is to try to treat the disease at the cause, which is the gene defect. And so add a normal version of the gene, and that's in essence, very simply put, what gene therapy would do. As all science, it's taken a lot longer to get there. And so we're finally at that moment where the science works and we have treatments and dare say cures for some of these lethal diseases. And unfortunately, based on venture and the current market trends, the pharmaceutical industry and then biotechs have abandoned these programs. And so they've been shelved, and we were able to collect these assets and are now pushing to get them back into the clinic. Some of them are open INDs, and product is available, sitting there in freezers and just not open. The INDs are on hold. So we've had over the past 10 or more years, we've started over 8 companies out of the University of Pennsylvania in the research from our lab, and had great success there through different companies. But even with the clinical successes that we've had for these programs, we've struggled to raise money, and in more recent years, even more so. Traditional ROI investors are withdrawing their support because of challenges of making money in this rare disease space. And the treatment of gene therapy is a one-time treatment. So it's very different than the standard pharmaceutical model of repeat drugs and a patient taking a product for the rest of their life. So these products that several have been approved already at the cost of $2 million to $4 million per treatment. And even though it's a one-time treatment, that is something that's not affordable for most individuals in most countries of the world, only high-income countries. And so as we've branched out to Gemma and want to get these therapies to patients all over the world who have these diseases, not just in the United States or in countries where the economy can afford to reimburse for these products. So key elements in our plan for Gemma Bio are to create a consortium of government agencies, simplify and coordinate the review of programs across multiple countries. We've started doing this already. We have a strong relationship with the FDA in the United States and CBER, led by Peter Marks, and his bold vision to change the way that Americans and others can get access to these new treatments. We also work, as Marty had mentioned, we just announced a partnership in October with the country of Brazil. The Ministry of Health had approached us, and we signed a $100 million deal with the government there so that they have the opportunity to develop gene therapy for 6 specific pediatric diseases that we have. And in return, they can distribute these products through their public health system. And that health, the regulatory authority there in Brazil is Anvisa, so they're partnering with FDA. This is the start of our international consortium of regulators. Another thing we want to do is be creative with how we finance this work. You know, rather than the strict venture capital play that we've done for many years and decades, that we'd like to look at a combination of grants, licensing, and mission capital, which is what you'll hear a lot more about from Norm and others today. And finally, looking at establishing the pricing and reimbursement policies so that we can generate sufficient revenue to have the company self-sustain and be able to reinvest into additional diseases. And again, there's over 10,000 different rare diseases, so we've got to start making, you know, showing the impact that the science can have. So see, we talked about Brazil, and I'm also joined here with my colleague from Gemma Biotherapeutics, Dr. Juliette Bordeaux, who is a veterinary pathologist. She's responsible for the preclinical work for all of these programs that will be running in Gemma Bio. So if you have a chance, you want to talk to her about AAV or any other scientific details, she's here with us today in Miami. And I wanted to also, before we get into the panel, I don't know if Marty, are we able to run the video? Where did Marty go?
Outside.
Okay, all right.
He's on the other side of that.
Okay, all right, so maybe not.
We'll do it at the end, perhaps.
Okay, sure. So then I will hand it over to our first panelist, Norm Friedland, to introduce himself.
Good morning.
Yeah, you're good.
Good morning, everyone. Martin, thank you for having us. Monique, thank you for hosting us. The theme of my brief presentation is mission capital for life science. Mission capital is not ROI capital, it's not investment capital. It's capital that comes from the philanthropic assets of high net worth family offices, either private foundations or DAFs, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a few minutes. The 5 points that I want to share with you, the first point is I'm really talking based on standing on the shoulders of giants, and those giants are Jim Wilson, who is the founder of Gemma Bio, who is really the godfather, grandfather of gene therapy. So what you're hearing from Monique and Juliette is absolutely legitimate science that they've been looking at for 30 or 40 years and now are bringing to patient benefit. The second giant is represented by Sean Kovalevsky, who's not the giant, but even though he's the tallest one in the room, is his CEO, Julian Adams, Dr. Julian Adams, who's the CEO of Stand Up to Cancer, which is a charity that Marty and I are working with that is really at the forefront of early screenings and AI for drug development. And the third giant is a fellow at MIT who runs a laboratory for financial engineering, which is Professor Andrew Lowe. And it's been his thesis that capital, both ROI capital and ROM capital, needs to move in at scale to life science fundings. And the reason for mission capital, as Elliot will explain, and others, and you all know, is that we're in the nuclear winter, and this is point number 2, we're in the nuclear winter for life science funding. This is not a hiccup, this is not an aberration. We've been in it for the last 2 years. We're going to be in the nuclear winter for the next 2 or 3 years, where you've got literally thousands, 1,000, 2,000 life science companies, many of which have gone public, are now finding it impossible to get additional capital to take what sounded like science fiction 5 years ago and is reality today. It's just impossible for them to get the ROI capital, the venture capital, the investment capital to move their science to patients. And that's where mission capital comes in. So mission capital, very briefly, point number 3, is IRS-approved fundings out of a foundation, a private foundation, in a family office, or it could be money in a donor-advised fund that is available to a for-profit company to support the mission of that company, which is not a grant. It's money that can come in alongside ROI capital as first loss capital. And if the company succeeds, then the funder will get a return of that capital with a small kiss representing interest. But more importantly, it will drive the mission. And in the case of cancer, that mission is obvious. In the case of the genetic therapy, the gene therapies that Gemma is talking about, you're talking about, horrible pediatric diseases that, just each one of them is worse than the next. And hopefully none of us have had the tragedy of experiencing that, but it's there. And so the 2 case studies that I can mention to you, one is Gemma, and we have some material here that I can share with you if you want to take it. And the other is a company I'm working with called Uncommon Cures, which is a startup company that sure. It's 50 cents a book, Mark.
You should charge 500.
I'm sorry, $500 a book and make the check to don't make the check to me. Uncommon Cures is a very interesting company. They've been set up to conduct very efficient, very cost-effective clinical trials in pediatrics, and that's a real need because right now, if you look at clinical trials, generally they're expensive, they're time-consuming, they often fail because they're not designed properly. And Uncommon Cures has the ability to understand that. So those are 2 examples. Gemma for their gene therapy drugs, and Uncommon Cures for its clinical trial work are 2 companies that we are working with on mission capital. And we can give you specifics of that. But the point is that as wealth advisors, as people who know dollars, and this is the last point I want to make, and that is healthcare doesn't look at your FICO score. You're the master of the universe. God forbid you've got a disease, your wife has a disease, your kids have a disease, your grandkids have a disease. Unfortunately, there are 15,000 rare diseases.
Yep.
And there's only 500 of them that have any possibility of any kind of therapeutic. And if you're in that 14,500 category, there's a legal term that was presented to me in my first year of law school. It's called SOL. And if you're in that 14,500 category, unfortunately, your wife, daughter, son, grandkid is SOL. And that's really what mission capital is designed to drive. Those solutions which exist. It's not like we have to go invent how to do this. People like Monique and Juliet know how to do it. And for less than the cost of the Los Angeles Dodger payroll, we can solve these diseases. Thank you.
Thank you, Norm. All right, Eric.
Thank you very much.
Eric, I'm sorry, I called you earlier.
Any name will do. I'm not proud. My name's Eric Singer. I'm with Bradley Woods. I'm a registered broker dealer. Coming to Lawrence events for 10 years. And my investors are small family offices, accredited investors that come into my small private placements. When I sold these deals, I sold Norman First and ROI deals. I actually try to use even simpler language to explain to investors as to why and how they should invest in a biotech company. Biotech is extremely risky. Sometimes people get involved in it because their mother died of pancreatic cancer and they want to try to do something. So typically, people will, when they hear about investing in a cancer drug, they'll think, oh, if I have a 10% chance of the drug being successful, and I can get back 10 times the money, that's a good investment. No, that's a terrible investment. You should not do it, okay? If you have so I try to do deals, and I don't have a big population, but I try to do deals where I believe, and I put my own money into these deals, where I believe that I have a 30 to 50% chance of making 20 times more money, okay? It's a very imperfect art. The two deals that I've worked on, I've mentioned to this group in the past, I worked on a periodic deal. I'm pleased to say, if I had to guess a market on my last deal in that space, I believe that my investors have made somewhere between 2 to 5 times their money. If they sit tight and things progress, I think they can wind up with 10 to 20. But on another company that I've worked with called Neotex has fallen on very hard times. As Norm has been reminding Marty, there are 700 biotech companies that raised more than $10 million on bankrupt in the last 2 years. Okay, and I'd like to give everybody the advice that the Rothschilds gave in the movie about Waterloo: invest when there's blood in the streets. Okay, there is blood in the streets. My investors came into my company and said $20 a share. We have found some rescue money, roughly $10 to $15 million of fresh money to retest our drug at 60 cents a share. Half my investors are exhausted and are screaming at me through the phone, and the other half of the investors are not exhausted, want to protect my position, and I can re-up side by side with a new investor at the same price he's investing at. Yes, I want to do that. On Neotex in particular, and Norm mentioned this as a factor in these things. These biotech, what's changed in the world of risk is two giant events took place in biotech. Number one is COVID came and went. So COVID was like a giant amount of money coming into the biotech world. And secondly, interest rates. We had a delusional relationship with interest rates for when we had a zero interest rate environment, and that delusion has now gone away. A lot of the investors that were okay with seeking asymmetric options have decided, gee, I'm comfortable with my fixed income investments. I see no reason to take any risk. So the population of buyers has dramatically shrunk. What that means is people who are open-minded and can look at, take a fresh look at the opportunities that are right there. They can have a truly asymmetric option. In the case of Neotex, over $300 million of research has gone into that, to the drug that they have. It's a very unusual drug. Basically, you take a fragment of Staphylococcus, you attach it to the surface of tumors, makes the body think that there's a bacterial infection, and we go from having 1% of the T cells in the body that know how to recognize staph, and you wind up with 60% of the T cells in the body that recognize staph are seeking out those tumors with the drug attached. We hope to do 2 trials. One is a trial in India where we're going to use our drug and checkpoint inhibitor on patients that are checkpoint naive. In the US, they're not, the oncologists routinely prescribe checkpoint as a first line. In India, they can't afford it, so we have AstraZeneca as a partner, so giving free drug to India is a big advantage there. Secondly, I believe we've done a mouse study, the Kraskin model for which need to be a good indicator for which drugs will work in pancreatic cancer. We have very strong mouse evidence that we work with pancreatic cancer. We treated some pancreatic patients. We did have a pancreatic patient with stage 4 that we completely cleared the tumor. It's 4 years later, there's no return of tumor. So I'm optimistic that we will wind up getting foundation support on the trial. When I say an asymmetric option, we wind up with something that improves over the current state for pancreatic. That's a multi-billion-dollar upside. So, I'm probably second to Norm and have a gray hair in the audience. I've been through a couple of business cycles in my life. Some of them are very volatile, but these esoteric industries that require deep understanding, they can go from wildly overvalued to wildly undervalued. And if you can avoid being exhausted, take the shot on re-up, and particularly right now is probably one of the best times. The broader stock market has rallied. The private market for biotech, not so much. And we're in December, people want to do tax selling. So I'll be talking tomorrow at 1 p.m. I'll give a little bit more depth on the mechanisms of action. Probably mention one other deal that's not a biotech deal, but it's a big opportunity for everybody. This is the exact moment to pay attention to this industry. Things that were worth 100 million 2 years ago are worth 5 million today, and they have the exact same upside as they have back then, and they were justifiable investments back then.
Thank you, Eric. So we have two more panelists.
I had a question for Norman Eric. I think one of the issues, and it seems like Neotex did the right thing, right? Which is that a lot of people went back to the marketplace looking to raise new capital, and they weren't willing to reprice downwards, right? And it seems like this was, Norm and I worked on something where they went back to the marketplace for 2 years and saying, we want gap financing, or, we want a bridge round, rather than saying, we're going to price down.
Well, okay, so
You can both address it, yeah.
We have an unusually dysfunctional corporate family. Okay, so I think that the company ultimately did the right thing. The CEO, to paraphrase Richard Nixon, when you have by the short hairs, their hearts and minds will follow. The CEO is no longer with the company, and the new investor came in and was the sheriff of the town and laid down the law. It happens to be that you can accept it. There are worse things than having a paid plate. If you survive and the drug has value and it can be tested and come out the other end in shining colors, it's wonderful. So you just have to assume, you have to accept the judgment of the market. Market down to a price where it goes. We avoided bankruptcy, which would have shattered, destroyed 20 years of IP. So yes, accept the mark and move on.
And as an early investor anyway, you can get crammed down. That's always been what happens.
Well,
in the venture space,
all of my investors, the largest outside investor that had put in 0.25% of their net worth. And all of my investors do this. An asymmetric option. If it works, we're buying a steak dinner. If it doesn't work, the right to start.
And my point is, what's the phrase we hear? Nobody thinks of zebras. Nobody thinks of mission capital. It's out there. It's out there in hundreds of billions of dollars, but nobody has figured out how to position the company to ask for that money in the right way to make it efficient. And part of what we do is do that. So I'm going to turn it over because we need to move ahead.
All right, so Sean, you're up, and then we have Steve online, but we'll go Sean.
Right, perfect. Thanks to everyone, and thank you to all the executive members that have gone to the town in a number of ways, support our mission. So Stand to Cancer, so we raise awareness and funds to support research focused on detecting and treating cancers at the earliest stages. Our model is very unique. I think there's a number of ways we I think partnership is really key to what we do at Stand Up. Collaboration is also key. For today, I'll kind of highlight on one part of our model, and I think it instead of the whole different ways that the organization operates, but we talk about a lot of the rare cancers. So we have funded research in over 84% of all cancers. Many of those are rare cancers. Through our partnerships, though, with pharma groups, most of the research have been on the more widely affected cancers, so breast and lung and prostate and colorectal, right? Not any of the rare cancers for the reasons that just highlighted that it's not profitable, right? So a lot of those projects that we funded are those purely philanthropic. So that comes from a family who may have a child or, you know, their mother was impacted by this, or father. And that's where, so those areas of those rare cancers are really funded by private philanthropists, where other cancer research is funded more by industry partners, biotech, a number of different ways. So, with our model, I think Norm hits on a lot of key points with the PRIs. I think for the groups that are working with these different biotech companies, really try to pull them upon receiving funding or receiving a PRI. Try to partner with the groups that can help stretch those dollars, provide better peer review, and fold you into a larger network. So that's what we do at Stand Up. What I think one of the secret sauce of our organization is, we have leading cancer centers that are directors that are volunteer on our committees that review the research that we fund and make sure that the teams are hitting their aims. So I think that's also, we can partner with biotech companies that may have a device, service, a product, a drug that that fits into that model. Try and pull in the right collaborators, whether that's nonprofit or for-profit, because there's a lot of opportunities there. So I know we're a little short on time, but I'll take it back.
Thanks, Steve. And then we have, Sean, I'm sorry, and then we have Steve Flame online.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Monique. It's a pleasure to be here with everybody. Sorry I can't be there in person. So I'm Steve Flame. I'm a cardiovascular physiologist by training, and I've spent a bunch of years in medical research, and then with large pharmaceutical companies on the East Coast. And the last 30 years, I've been here in San Diego in the biotech industry. And about 20 years ago, I got engaged with one of the largest organized angel groups in the country. It's now known as the IvyFON Venture Group here in San Diego. So I've been doing angel investing in healthcare technologies for 20 years. And about 15 years ago, the NIH reached out to me to help them develop an office which was to be devoted to accelerating the commercialization of early stage technologies that have been funded by the National Institutes of Health. And so I've been doing that for about the last 15 years as well. And so what we do, so I'm here wearing two hats. One is representing NIH, and the other representing the angel investor asset sector. And so these two sectors work together at the very earliest stages of company identification and development, aggregating obviously non-dilutive capital in the form of NIH funding, and then early stage dilutive capital with the angel investor sector. And so Monique, I'll leave it there, and you can move on with your Q&A.
Great, thank you. Well, I think Norm and Eric, you've had some interesting points that you brought up about the nuclear winter. I don't know if you want to talk about that some more.
I used to work at a firm where we said repetition is reputation. Now is the time. Okay, you're going to take if it's something on your radar. If you're interested in asymmetric options, you do have some biotech in your portfolio. Now is the time, both in the public and the private space. There's a lot of tax selling going on. I would just be emphatic on the point that I made earlier.
The microphone's working, right?
Yes.
So my sixth point is that we are in the tsunami of wealth transfer. From my generation to your generation, you're talking about, what's the number, $100 trillion, Mark? I mean, I don't even know what that, but some portion of that wealth transfer is.
You would have the answer on the other side of the room.
Okay, so
How much money is being transferred from one generation to the next?
70 trillion.
say again.
I think it's 70 trillion is what I heard.
Trillion.
Last
70 trillion, just so we can all hear that.
Okay, 70 trillion, not 100 trillion, around the year. So the point is, the recipients of that wealth transfer want to do their philanthropy different from their parents, their grandparents. they don't want to put their name on a building, they don't want to write a research grant to a professor, to a lab, just to do a paper. They want to see impact. They want to see impact in the life science space that's really patient benefit. And what we have with companies like Gemma, with organizations like Stand Up to Cancer, like companies that you've heard about, this mission capital can be sourced at scale in ways that are efficient and that are fiduciarily responsible. And so, as you think about this, as you talk to your clients, as you talk to your advisors, again, when you hear leads, think of the zebras. That's what mission capital is. And through the model that Andrew Lowe from MIT has given us, that mission capital can come in as first loss capital. It can be subordinate to the ROI capital that reduces risk substantially and increases the upside substantially.
Thanks, Norm. I think it's really important when we talk about the different types of investment and contributing to these assets and programs that are out there. And Norm saying, people nowadays want to do things a little bit differently than maybe their predecessors have in the past. And when I think about the idea that, if anyone in the room have any connection to someone with a rare disease? Only gotta be more. You just don't know it, I bet. So 1 in 10 individuals in America is connected to, is impacted by a rare disease. So some of the diseases that we're working on in Gemma Biotherapeutics, GM1 gangliosidosis, Krabbe disease, muco MLD, like things that you've maybe never heard of, and hopefully you don't, but when it does impact in your family member, your loved one, can you imagine? So 20 years ago, when you were at the doctor's office and they told you, oh, there's this genetic defect and there's nothing that we can do about it. There's no treatment, no cure, and please just take your child home and love them and enjoy the time that you'll have with them, because they will only, probably live a few years. Imagine that scenario now, current day, and there actually is a treatment for X disease. And the doctor now has to say to you, well, there is a treatment, but the venture and the capital markets were not interested to fund it. It wasn't going to meet their return on investment. So there is a treatment for your child or your loved one's disease, but it's on a shelf, in a freezer, in a laboratory somewhere. How would you feel delivering that message to a family member? And so this is the opportunity that exists right now, and this will really jumpstart where this technology is able to go. We have a platform approach with gene therapy. So we have 6 diseases that have the same route of administration, the same manufacturing, and the same capsid, so that all you're replacing is the gene product. And with this, we're able to leverage that process. And this is part of what we're doing with the FDA and other regulators to streamline the process. So this is an example where rare disease, you might not have one, you might not know of one, but this leads to the next step for more common diseases as well. The programs that we've worked on are already de-risked. AAV gene therapy has hundreds of clinical trials and about 7 approved products in the United States at this time. So it's just the beginning of where this technology can go. Sean, so we had talked a little bit earlier, and something common in the rare disease space and others, I'm sure, is the valley of death, and where the research gets to a certain point and then the funding is just not looking like the odds might be great, or and so it's a big problem in many areas, I think. So when we were at Penn, Jim Wilson, who again is our director, recruited Dr. Carl June, who many of you probably heard of in the CAR T space. He's one of the founders of that technology, and it's made tremendous tremendous progress in cancers. So I don't know, what is your, experience there? I think with philanthropy, it's been huge, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And-
And he really helped, that study really helped direct a lot of ours, where we focused our funding for a number of years. He's been a friend for, 10+ years of the organization, and we told the story of Emily Whitehead, which was the first patient to receive this therapy for a number of years, and had a lot of benefits on spreading the word of what to look for, what options are available, and what treatments are out there for children that are going through those types of experiences.
But it starts with philanthropy, and I think, what our big part of what we're trying to get across today is the importance of the diversity, diversifying your funding sources and having hybrid models, and doesn't all need to be from one source of capital.
Completely agree, and the hybrid model, I think Norm absolutely hit the nail on the head on that about, impact is all you hear, right? So the traditional ways of giving and those trends are changing every single day. So nonprofits are tasked with making sure you're set up to be able to accept complicated assets. So the blended funding versus pure philanthropic on, do you have an impact aspect to your organization that we can move some of our portfolio there because we're interested in impact space, or the ability to even accept some of these complicated assets that are transferring from generation to generation. We see that every single day. I work on that every single day. It's basically positioning ourselves to demonstrate greatest impact for the mission, right, with ours is cancer research, but also the financial benefits for the donor who wants looking at that multi-generational philanthropy approach.
Great. And Steve, I wanted to throw out a question to you there on the Zoom. So you also have different sources, you talked about angel investors, and then there's the NIH. So what are some of your, what's your advice and guidance on how these different sources of capital can be implemented?
So obviously, we work with very, very early stage companies. The typical funding journey for a startup is, they start with an entrepreneur and an idea, maybe a little bit of data, and they recognize that there's a commercial opportunity here, an impact on healthcare. And usually what they do is they aggregate a few $100,000 with founders, friends, and family. And then the next step is, they need more money than that. And what we recommend is that early stage companies at that stage think about applying for small business innovation research grant funding from NIH. The other sectors, HHS sectors, have SBIR funding as well. And that amounts to, in 300,000 to 500,000 range, and then maybe stage 2 would be a couple of $1 million. And these are this is money that is to be spent in 6 months to like 2 or 3 years. But you know that you can't really bring a product in healthcare to the market or to the patient with just government funding. So that's where it's really important for companies to recognize that angel investors get involved at that stage. And so the typical angel investment is maybe $1 million of dilutive funding, could be convertible debt funding, and the valuation of the company at that stage is going to be in the $3 to $5, maybe $7 million range. And once that money is raised and spent, the company should be at the stage of being able to either start clinical trials or move through clinical trials. And then there's additional government funding that can be used, but ultimately at that stage, they need to look at other funding sources like venture capital. And obviously, in parallel with all of this would be nonprofit funding and mission capital as well.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think that's really important what you mentioned about there's so many different phases of research and where these programs are and assets. And it doesn't take $100 million for the earliest thing. And these different sources in different dollar amounts are really critical to get things to the next phase, and using hybrid sources as well can just help moving them along, and that's all that it really takes. Let's see, I don't know if Marty, am I supposed to be taking questions from the chat?
Yes, there's
Okay.
online questions asked as well.
Okay, and so also just let's start by opening it up to the people in the room here first, and then we can go to the online. Anyone have questions?
Mark,
Oh, sorry.
So this one's directed out to Steve. I don't know if you can hear me or not. If you
Yes, I can
me,
hear you.
Beautiful. My question to you, so somebody comes in as an early stage investor, a seed stage investor, then you have your Series A. How long is the ride for them? Are there any exit points for them along the way?
So let me start off by saying that I really don't like the terminology seed and Series A because seed and Series A mean different things to different people. So I tend to talk about check sizes. So the first check size is maybe up to $1 million, and then maybe the next one would be more like $10 million. So just to make that clear. And then, we always advise the companies that we're working with at NIH to develop a development program that includes exit opportunities for the investors. And, from the investor perspective, I always tell companies, if you're going to look for angel money, you need to convince the angels that they're going to get their principal back in 5 years times 10. So you've got to make that case. And so the question is, when is that going to happen? And so a lot of the early stage technologies can achieve an exit opportunity, maybe once they get their first clinical data, maybe safety data in the clinic, maybe phase 2 clinical trial data, which shows some efficacy. That's usually the first exit strategy. And then obviously the next major one would be once they get regulatory approval. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I think I came close to it.
Yeah, Eric may have some thoughts too.
Yeah, for me, I don't have a master plan on this stuff. The company, in the case of the cancer drug company, we wound up raising $86 million for them in a series of 4 races. We had some whales come in. Occasionally, there's an opportunity for small investors to exit. We had a couple of investors passed away, and their widows needed some liquidity. We were able to do something in that area, but I would advise investors to ask, can you accommodate me if I need to sell, and what expectation should I have? An honest broker will tell them, look, I can't guarantee that there's going to be a market, and if there is a market, it's going to be very thin. And if you ever need to sell these shares, you're going to sell them at a sharp discount to what their going concern value is.
Great. Do you have a question?
Yeah, just maybe for Eric, just on valuation specifically, how far down are the down rounds, and what metrics are you using today?
We're down 95%. Okay, in the cancer drug company. So it's when new money comes in and it's fresh money and it's critical mass money. So biotech, it tends to divide into, can you fund the trial or not? Okay, the days of we fell into a trap with the market where there was a moment in time in 2020 where if you were a viable stage 2 doing a viable phase 2 trial in oncology, the stock market was saying you're worth $250 million. Okay, today the stock market doesn't care, and the private market, which prices off of the stock market, doesn't care. So I think in the old days, if you had all your preclinical stuff in place and you were ready to do a phase 1, you're probably looking at a $50 million valuation. In certain or more, but in certain cases that will still stick. But there are phase 1 companies that are getting $10 million valuations. You can't. It's difficult to. You don't want to oversimplify. You have to look at the mechanism of action. Have some sense of the gravitas of the weight of opinion behind it, and take your chances.
I think that people don't really delve into why a lot of this occurred, which is that, in 2021, interest rates are really low. People could actually invest with borrowed money, right?
But, and they
Without
want,
having a tax event, right?
right, and they were, but they felt, well, my money's not doing it.
Yes.
Okay, so that, that population of buyers is, it's been decimated. There's 20% of the number of people that were willing to do something when their money was getting zero is probably 1/5 today of that in terms of casual.
So it's
the
important
guys
that
want to take
besides the frothy valuations, it's also on top of the fact that macroeconomics has not favored.
frothy valuations.
Right.
Extending the runway, okay, so if you're, somebody said, well, gee, you should show your investors how they can make 10 times their money in 5 years. I'm probably gonna pull that off with my periodontal deal, but good luck. I mean, that's actually a difficult thing to deliver on, okay, so I think the timeframes have gotten pushed out. Investors want their money they have palpable chance to make money, or much smaller pool of investors, which is why it's such a great time to invest, because the valuations are going to reflect that.
But it
much
doesn't
more
mean that
value.
reasonably priced, fundamentally sound management teams can't do well, right?
Yeah, they can find money, but they ought to just, out the other end of this, you can go back to heaven. Okay, I mean, out the other, these things are cyclical, and I was in an industry, had nothing to do with biotech. We raised money for frequency. Okay, we were going to compete with the cable TV companies with terrestrial frequency. And there was a moment in time when that industry went in 3 years from 100 million valuation to a $3 billion valuation, and then the satellites came in and took that market away from us. Okay, so it went back down to 100 million valuation. And then 2 years later, people woke up and realized, oh my God, the phone companies need that. Went back up to a $10 billion valuation. Stay the course.
I have a question for Monique and Stephen. First, kudos for staying in gene therapy. It's a hard road. I started there in 1980.
Okay.
The issue I see is manufacturing, and there was a move at the FDA to consider streamline manufacturing, because right now, gene therapy companies are subject to the same biologic manufacturing that big corporates, engineering runs, stability runs, et cetera. When you can now make in a single crock pot the 80 doses you need for 80 patients. There was an idea to streamline it and head there. Is that continuing, and are we making progress there? Because that's the only way to solve the problem for these thousands of personalized medicine treatments which are available. And at the end, kudos for you for taking them forward. But is there any progress to streamline it and simplify?
Yes, so there is actually with Peter Marks, again, the leader of CBER, Center for Biologics. We are actually serving as a pilot program. They started something called I think it's called the START program now. It was initially called Warp Speed for Rare Diseases, and then that Warp Speed name had some negative connotations. So they changed it to the START program. And so Gemma Bio, I don't know that we've publicly announced this, but they have, so our platform, we have a platform approach with the 6 diseases that we're working on, use the same manufacturing. And so with this, the FDA is looking that you don't need to submit that CMC section every time. So we're starting as an example of that, and we'll go from there to see if others can do it. I mean, I think the challenge has been, as you've seen with all the investment from the public, from venture and on the hundreds of startups that existed, in 2021 in the rare disease gene therapy space, that you had 150 companies, 150 CEOs, 150 CFOs, et cetera, and the bankroll for all of that. And each company had 1 or 2 assets. And so, yes, that is not a repeatable model. Everyone has their own manufacturing. And so with this platform approach that we're trying to, sort of proof of concept, we've done it, I think, in our lab. If I could, Juliet, do you mind if I call on you to speak more to this? You want to come on up? Sure. she'll be able to speak more to the science part and, oh,
I just want to remind you that we do want to answer the questions online, just
Oh,
5
yes.
or 10 of them.
sorry, okay, sorry, I'm not seeing all of them. Thanks, Julia.
Yeah, so but you spoke to it,
Julie, can you do me a favor and get next to her, so that way you're on the camera?
oh,
Perfect.
yeah. Do I need to push a button?
No, you can just use this microphone.
Yeah, I think the platform is the key, having multiple assets that are using the same manufacturing platform. So in our case, we're using the same capsid, same capsid, and then the only thing you need to change is one plasmid that you put into your cells that are producing a vector, just one plasmid. So what it means, we've done it 56 times, we have 56 runs that we've done either preclinically or in GMP runs, where you only change one plasmid in your manufacturing process. So we can starting to collate data and go to FDA, not with less, but with more data actually. And then what does that mean? That means you don't need to do as many runs for PPQ, and all the process is going to be streamlined. So that's the hope. And again, if you're doing it in multiple companies with different manufacturing processes, then you can do that. You have to collate them into one company.
Great, I'll say to take it one step further, we're also in our work with Anvisa, the regulatory authority from Brazil, partnering with the FDA, similarly that we'll be working together on a clinical program that we're running in Brazil for the FDA to be involved to coordinate the review process, so to speak, so that if it goes through Anvisa in Brazil, that the FDA team was there, sort of every step of the way, and just take some of the steps out of it. Thanks. Marty, do you want me to go ahead?
You can answer the questions online, that'd be great.
Okay. All right. So let's see. We have, what is the prevalence and incidence of the disease globally or in targeted regions? Orphan diseases often affect fewer than 200,000 people in the US, and ultra-orphan diseases may have fewer than 10,000 cases. What is your bar to look at or enter? I think the straight and easy answer there is science. It is not numbers. It is not the patient population size. It is looking at the science and seeing what works with AAV gene therapy. It's certainly not going to be the solution for all diseases, but there's some, say, low-lying fruit out there that are not hemophilia and sickle cell, which are the larger of these rare disease groups. Norm?
So there is an asset that many of these life science companies have that people don't know anything about, and it's called the Priority Review Voucher, PRV. And for a pediatric company developing a drug, if that drug is successful, the FDA will give that company a PRV, a Priority Review Voucher. That voucher can be sold to a large pharma company so that that large pharma company can accelerate its blockbuster drug into the marketplace. The average price of a PRV that's being sold today is $150 million. And we think that price is going to go up to $200 to $250 million in coming years. There's an opportunity in putting that together with Gemma and some other people to buy a PRV today, a potential PRV today at a serious discount, taking into account the risk of science and the time. But the upside of this for an ROI investor in combination with a mission capital investor is not trivial. And I think in the Gemma material, we mentioned that. So that goes to the question that there may not be any commercial viability to a very, very rare drug. But in the pediatric case, that PRV has a $100 to $150 million payday, which can easily cover the cost of an investment in getting that drug to approval.
Sorry, I'm trying to find the user error here with scrolling. How can a for-profit company reconcile the ROI challenges compared to a nonprofit or foundation, given that mission capital often yields 2 to 3x returns over the 10+ years with a high failure rate due to capital constraints, while biotech for-profits aim for 10 to 20x returns in 5 to 7 years? would mission-driven capital be more effectively utilized through a nonprofit or foundation model, ensuring tax benefits and sustainability rather than risking the uncertainty of?
Let me
Oh, wow.
respond to that by saying,
Yeah, lost it
I'll
on
talk
the
about that offline. That's a complicated question. We can justify mission capital for a for-profit company because that mission capital will essentially accelerate ROI capital. That's the whole point of the mission capital. The ROI capital isn't available unless that mission capital is there. But I'm happy to have that conversation with whoever asked that question.
They're online.
They're online?
Yeah.
Well, we can, they can email us and we'll have that conversation, Marty.
Okay.
I wasn't sure I heard properly. Is the PRV voucher only for the pediatric?
There are actually three priority vouchers. One is for
Pediatric rare.
pediatric rare. The second is for biodefense, and the third is for tropical diseases.
Biodefense?
Biodefense.
That's pretty broad, isn't it?
Yes and no. I mean, our focus is not, I mean, we've looked at biodefense, we've looked at tropical disease. Our focus is in the pediatric space.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions in the room?
Norm, in terms of putting that sort of acceleration capital in as philanthropy, do you have to arbitrate the interests of making a donation that accelerates an ROI of a for-profit investor? Now, I realize the donation has succeeded in its mission if it does that, but is there any conflict between those two different things?
Absolutely. I mean, the best example is cystic fibrosis and Vertex. Okay, where cystic fibrosis said, look, we think we have a solution for cystic fibrosis. We're going to put some money into a drug. They went to Vertex and they said, can you figure out how to do it? Vertex said yes. The result was a drug for cystic fibrosis. Vertex has gone wildly successful, and cystic fibrosis got $3.5 billion. So, you know, win for the patient, win for the company, win for the foundation. That's really what we want to replicate over and over for these rare diseases.
I'm sorry, was it a financial win for the foundation or?
$3.5 billion.
Impact.
Impact and $3.5 billion.
Oh, so it wasn't financial.
Yep.
Big growth, and then that basically, you know, fuels their operating costs year to year, they can expand without having to invest like a lot of other
Yeah.
nonprofits.
So my question was about a donation where there's no financial return that we come back.
Right, and I mean, I think what Norm was getting at further is that the number of ways to structure it, it really depends on goals of the person who's doing it, but you can navigate all those, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that the mission, you know, as long as everyone is aligned on what the mission is, and that's what is huge. I mean, CFF, Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, was the gold standard of what everyone would dream to do, to have those dollars to reinvest in other programs that people aren't interested in funding. And with rare diseases, we have got plenty to work on. So, all right, Norm, any other final comments?
The last point I would just make, point number 7, I think, is
Yep.
look,
If you're keeping count.
if we can't figure out how to source the mission capital for the life science solutions, you know, when that family hears there's nothing we can do for your father, your son, your daughter, etc. When society hears that message, then what I would suggest to all your ROI investors is invest in pitchforks. That's going to be the better investment, because society is not going to stand by and see these solutions not reaching the population. And you know, pitchforks is where your investments are going to make a lot of money.
Well, the rare disease community will not have it, I'll tell you that. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your questions and attention.